Hello, my name is Matt Ryer. Today I'm going to give you an overview of the xbar project. We're going to look at the project structure, some of the components within it, the front end, the back end, and some other supporting tools. And just get an idea really of the thought process that went behind it and how it ended up and how it's evolving. So this is me, Matt Ryer. Feel free to follow me on Twitter. I tweet a lot about tech and bits and pieces. I also do the Go Time podcast, if you like podcasts, and I have a book, Go Programming Blueprints, second edition. You don't have to buy it if you don't want to, but you can if you like. Do what you like, it's your money. Okay, so what is xbar? Well, look at this. It's an app. It's a real Mac app. It lives in, it takes pride of place in the applications folder, and it's a real application. And if I run it, what it does is it puts the output of any executable into the menu bar. So you can see I have this example here. This shows me the recent earthquakes around the world. And this is achieved by a little script that runs, it pulls data from some API. It prints that list out into standard out, and then xbar takes that and turns it into these menus. And you can see that you can do some slightly more sophisticated things as well than just text. And you can even make these clickable. So you can add actions to menus and lots of other things, submenus, and there's a few features there. You can build really quite robust things, and people have. They've built some amazing applications, actually. We also have a plugin browser. And this is an application which lets you browse through various categories and look at all the different plugins that are available. And from here, you can install them and you can manage them. And so, look, I have the People in Space plugin here. It refreshes every 6 hours. I guess this doesn't need to refresh more often than that because it takes a bit of time to get people in and out of space. And here's our Earthquake plugin. You can see the source code too. It's all completely open source, so you can look at everything before you install things. You can really get visibility into what you're doing because at the end of the day, you're running other people's code on your machine. So you should always be careful. Now, the only plugins that show up in here are ones that are in the repo itself. So we do we check to make sure that they're all nice plugins, not going to do anything malicious. Otherwise, we don't accept the PRs. But you can write your own plugins also very easily, especially developers love to do this. And like I say, there are some amazing plugins in here which you should explore and look around. The other thing that is worth showing you, I think, is this is what every good application has: dark mode. So say you're able to switch it into dark mode, and look how seamlessly that transitions as well. This application is a Go program with a JavaScript front end. It runs Svelte. It's HTML, CSS, and it's basically a website, but has the feel and look of a native app. You can maximize it, you can minimize. It's a real sort of application. So how does it work? How was it built? Well, that's what I'm going to show you now. So if we have a look, we have a repo. It's a single mono repo. And by the way, it is completely open source. So if we go to mattryer/xbar, you can look at all the code in here and you can just, you can see everything. It's all completely open source and it has everything to make the project work in one place. And that's quite a nice pattern. Not all companies avoid it, or people tend to break things down a lot because, for reasons, for quite good reasons too. I like mono repos. Everything's in one place. It's simple, and I can commit. Like I could do a PR that has back end, front end, maybe even website changes. If there's documentation, and that all goes in at the same time in one PR, which is very nice. Very nice feature of monorepos. Now, xbar was written using Wales. Wales is a desktop app, multi-platform framework that basically gives you an interface into the sort of lower level operating system. It gives you a web view that lets you put your HTML and CSS, serve that out. And it also has some really cool OS specific things, and it's abstracted too, so it's multi-platform. And I'm actually using the version 2 rewrite of Wales, which isn't ready. It doesn't work on every platform. xbar currently only runs on a Mac, and then once Wales supports the other platforms, xbar will then support the other platforms. So it's a great choice if you want to build, using existing knowledge to build web desktop applications. If you already know how to do client-server web-based services, then Wales is kind of the perfect choice. It also solves the client-server RPC, so it lets you call methods just sort of transparently. You can just call methods on the back end, and it runs code in the front end, and vice versa, where you can call methods from the front end and just like normal functions, call them, and it's Go code that runs, and you get the response. So it manages all that for you, which is great as an app developer because you just want to get on with it, really. So the front end is actually a Svelte application. And if we go into app front end, well, let me give you a quick overview of this first. Look, so we have the app. This is literally the main app. It has the front end and the back end in here. The back end is Go, as you can see, and the front end is Svelte, as you can see. There's also a package, a few packages, in fact. There's the plugins package, the metadata, and there's an update package. The plugins package is the one that does all the heavy lifting for xbar. This actually processes plugins, runs them, parses the output, and everything that needs to go on really in order for it to work. And I try not to break things up into packages too much too early, but this one was a kind of self-contained idea, and so kind of made sense to me to have as its own package from the beginning. And there's also the metadata package. Now, plugins can contain metadata, and I'll talk about this later. This is the package that parses and understands that. There's also some tools. There's a site gen here. The website is statically generated, which is kind of really nice, actually. And I just wrote my own tool to do that, and I'll dig into that later too. And then, of course, there is the website, which is an App Engine project. Very simple, has a few bits and pieces, but not much. And it's really just serving that static content. And then I'll show you the static content too. Okay. So let's have a look. The front end, one of the things that's nice about Svelte is it's still component based. Like, I have this breadcrumbs component here that contains some script, contains some style, and it contains some markup with Svelte's templating language in here for things. If I want to iterate, you can use each. If I want to do conditionals, I can use these if tags. So quite simple. There's not a lot to learn in Svelte because it's a bit like Go. It's quite cut down and lightweight. So it's a great choice, I think. And I think it's just going to keep getting more and more popular. They're doing really great work there. It also does its work at compile time. So Vue, React, these other frameworks, they have quite a lot of things going on in the browser in order to make things work. Well, Svelte brings that work up front and does a lot of it and does all the sort of wiring up at compile time. And that means that you just serve quite a small little, relatively small package to the front end, and it has everything it needs with very little extra overhead. Like there's no virtual DOM, things like that. So pretty cool. Check it out if you've not seen it. And I also use Tailwind CSS, which I like because not only does it give us dark mode, but it also gives you really quite a lot of control of the actual the look of it. If you think about Bootstrap, if you bootstrap things, do I mean Bootstrap? Let me check. I do mean Bootstrap. If you use Bootstrap, this is more opinionated. This actually, decides what buttons look like and various controls. Tailwind is lower level than that. You just talk about padding and rounding and colors and things. But of course, so maybe a bit more work to do. But actually, especially if you use it with a front-end framework like Svelte, it's very easy to build the components in a way that just looks and feels unique. And I think that's quite important. If you care about the user experience, I care about every pixel. And so I want control of every pixel. And with Tailwind, you do get that. It's not as low level as just doing native CSS. It's kind of a nice mix of the both. Check it out if you've not seen it. Okay, so the back end. Well, this is a Go. I am interested in Go the most, so let's have a look at it. Well, the main Go just really kicks off the Wales app. It has very little global state. I do use Go embed here to put the version in. That's, I think, the only global state, because I really try and avoid global state. And that allows me to write tests in an easier way. It avoids other kinds of bugs that can be tricky to find. And it's kind of like really obvious where things are needed as well. If you have things in global state, any bit of code can access it and call it. If you don't do that, if you instead pass things around, you're making that process explicit, and that has benefits for readability and other benefits too. Testing is probably the biggest benefit. So I don't have any global state. I also do this quick little main abstraction where the main function just calls immediately out to another function, run, that can return an error. And then I just get to handle errors once. So that's a nice little thing. The other thing is if this application used standard in, standard out, or used arguments or anything, I would pass those in as arguments here. And that makes testing really easy because I'm just calling this function instead of trying to run a command. Inside here, I just create the app with a new app. And that's another common thing I do is I tend to, because I want to avoid global state. So instead I'll have an app that contains all the bits I need. And it makes it very explicit. It's very easy, but I can actually create multiple versions of this safely without them interfering with each other. And that's a nice benefit, especially for testing. Okay, so app basically has a start, it has a shutdown callback here. This is really the hooks into the system. But check out the rest of these options here. You have the title of the window, the size of the window here. You can decide if when the application starts, whether you see the window or not, or whether it's hidden. And there's some very specific Mac options here as well. And Wales is, Lee Anthony, who's the creator of Wales, is doing an amazing job of trying to find the right things to expose in the right ways. Anything that's common across platforms, like the size of a window, that goes in the Wales, this sort of first class API. For more specific things, you still want to be able to do them, so he exposes them via this little struct inside these options. That's very nice. For example, there are URL handlers, and if I have time, I'll explain today how that works. But this is essentially allows us to register xbar : / as a protocol that allows us to interact with the application from the outside. Very cool. And allows me to, on the website, if we go to xbarapp.com, this allows me to add a button open in xbar app. And essentially, if you look at the URL there at the bottom, I don't know if you can see that, that is an xbar URL that works when you've installed the app. So very cool that Wales enables all this for us. Yeah, there are also context menus and a few other things. And this bind is very powerful. This is how I essentially wire up services that are available to the front end. So by adding the person service here, I'm actually able to call person service from the front end, and I just call the go method seamlessly. Wales takes care of all that heavy lifting to wire that up for you. It's brilliant. Right, so the app start is the first place that gets called. And this is the first time we get given the Wales runtime. And the runtime is really how we interface with the operating system. It lets me, well, I'll show you real examples. You can see here that I assign them to the different services that need them. So again, it's tempting to put this into some global state somewhere. But by making this explicit, it just makes things much clearer, I think, and much easier to read. And I also have this little pattern, which I use a lot. On the command service, I've got this clear cache function, and I can assign it to a different function. And so if I go into the command service here, it's just a very simple way of having a kind of a dependency, but not really a full dependency. It's almost like a lightweight function abstraction. So this is nice for when you want to hook things together in a very lightweight way. You could create an interface around this and have it as an official type. And maybe there'd be reasons why you'd want to do that later. And I may end up doing that. Whenever you look at code, you're really looking at a snapshot in time of that code. So this isn't the final thing. I don't think there ever really is a final thing. This is just how it is right now. And this has a little function. It's very easy to set this to anything, including like no ops. So it's very nice for testing. If I wanted to ignore the cache, or if it's calling clear cache at certain points and I didn't want to actually do anything, I could just set this to an empty function that doesn't do anything. Or I could set it to a function and test, check that, make sure that that function was actually called. So it's a nice little pattern. You may want to try that. Another thing you can do, and I do sometimes, is declare this as a type. So you might do type clear cache func that is this type, and then I use that there instead. Now I think you lose a bit of readability here, but what it enables you to do is write a comment and explain what this function does. I'm not going to do this now, but that's something that I do tend to do from time to time. Okay, let's have a look at this Wales runtime object, because it's very cool. So if I search app runtime, this is where we actually get access to the menu system on the Mac. Of course, this is sort of native functionality, and I'm using Go to do it. And it's essentially Wales that enables that. So from the runtime, look, I can just access this menu. I can set tray menus. These are the tray menus at the top. I can delete tray menus too. I can emit events to the front end. So if you choose to do a refresh here, it will actually refresh also the front end, because things may change. And this Wales allows me to do that. I can also do it the other way around too, i.e. call functions in the front end, from the front end into the back end. Very cool. Wales also provides dialog boxes, and this is a pretty kind of nice to have sort of as a feature, really. These are native operating system dialog boxes, but I just call them like any other Go function. As you can see here, it's quite easy. This is the sort of update code. And if you've actively asked for it to do an update and you are up to date, we want to tell the user that. So we use a dialog message. We can also have multiple buttons in these dialog boxes, and the response from this function is a string of, with the telling you which button was clicked. So in this case, I'm asking, do you want to update? Now there is an update, would you like to do it? And I just do this little pattern where I switch on this, and in case they choose update, then we're going to continue through and do it. If they choose later, we just return here. So, it's like I get to write proper Go code that I understand, but I'm actually dealing with the operating system. Very cool. And there's lots of other things too, like quit, and show the window. You really can control it. So check out the Wales API for more on that. So one of the things xbar does is it parses the output from this plugin. And so a plugin is just an executable that runs any executable actually, and it uses standard out. It reads the lines, it then processes those and turns them into the menu. So how does it do that? Well, this is where this plugins package comes in, and this was a great candidate for TDD. So this definitely was a TDD job for me. Some problems aren't great. Like if you're building UIs, they're quite difficult to test because a lot of it's about good taste. And there are functional tests that you can do. Like if I click this button, this should happen. But very often you end up just repeating yourself twice. And I don't find those tests to be that useful, especially like as a project is evolving still. But in this case, where I'm processing output from a specification, which is really what this is, there's a kind of API really for plugins. And you can see an example here of this is lots of submenus. So, I have this A, which is going to just put an A in the top. Then we have the separator, which is then going to put some items in the drop down. And I use these little hyphens to nest submenus and things. That's part of the API. So this is the test for that. And you can see that I just send in the strings that that I expect a plugin to print, and then I'm going to inspect the actual types, the structured data that was created from that. And of course, if any of this is wrong, that would then fail the test, and I know that my thing isn't working as expected. So it's awesome to TDD that specifically. I did the same for these item parameters as well. It's possible to, this is how you attach actions, and you can change the colors, and you can control things. You basically have a pipe character in your output line, and then you specify parameters like this. So of course, that's another great candidate for TDD. There's known inputs, known outputs. I can clearly write them and check that they work. And this is it. It's just all tested like this. This gives me the confidence that xbar does as it should. Okay, so what about how do we get that into menus then? Because that's, if you look at this, the types that are returned are like it's this item. Actually, I'm going to switch to here so we can see this more clearly. No, I'm not. It's not in it. Okay, so we have this item type. My IDE is a little confused at the moment, but you'll get the sense of it. We've got these items here. This plugin it handles the execution of it too. So you can see there's lots of code in here that's not just dealing with menus. This actually runs the plugins too. And eventually you get these menu items that look like this. And they've got text, they've got these item params. And the params really are what describe the configuration of that particular menu item. So again, I'm still only describing it here. How do we actually turn that into a real menu item? Well, back in the app, we have the menu parser here. And this isn't a lot of code, but this essentially takes in the plugins item and returns a Wales menu item. So again, Wales is essentially modeling the operating system's APIs for menus and exposing that to me. So all I have to do is turn an item, one of my items, into a Wales item. And look, most of it's just sort of simple mapping code between the two APIs. There are a few little nuances and things, but it's all very explicit and clear. I really don't mind this kind of code. It's tempting to want to avoid it, especially if you've got lots of it. But one thing I'll say for it is it's explicit. It's very clear what's happening. So I really don't mind that at all. So then I get these Wales menu items, which I can give to Wales, and Wales puts them in here for me and allows me to see it. Wales uses a lot of Seago and interrupts like that with the operating system. So if you want to learn more about that, go and check out the Wales project. It's fully open source as well, and sponsor it if you can, because it's brilliant and Lee's great and doing great work for free. Okay. Next, I want to show you the plugin service very quickly. I group the functionality up into these services, and each one has its own dependencies that it needs. For example, it makes HTTP requests, it has a client. Well, I use the same client in all of the services, but I don't use global state because maybe I want to write a test that's going to use a different client or it's going to do something different. That's possible in this case, that wouldn't be otherwise. And then, I just have methods on this service. Remember, because I did the bind earlier, these services are they're just callable from the front end. So if I go into the front end and we look in our RPC thing here, this is how we actually call the services. And look, it's just like a promises API. So if you write JavaScript, this is very familiar, and it's such a great way to just call the backend code. Okay. Incoming URLs is another thing that's quite cool. We touched on it earlier, but check this out. So if we look in our info plist, this is Mac specific, but you can actually do this where you say, this is an xbar protocol, and I want to basically register that so that it's usable in when you install the application. And it essentially Wales again will do that work for us. You can see that we have these URL handlers, and all I do is say, okay, if the protocol is xbar, call handle incoming URL. That's just a little method, and I've got my Go code in here that's going to then, if the path is open plugin, it's going to open the plugin by emitting an event, shows the window and emits an event to the front end. If it's refresh plugin, we find the plugin and we trigger a refresh. So it's like xbar itself has a runtime API that you can use to interact with. So powerful, and again, it's really thanks to Wales that it's able to do that. Finally, I don't have much time left, but I want to just quickly show you the website. The website's completely static, and I love this about it. And I wrote a tool that did it. So, there are tools that allow you to generate static sites, but I'll tell you what, if it's not that complicated and you write it yourself, you have so much control. You basically have complete control, and that's what I decided to do. So I just have some code in here. It's not the greatest code I've ever written. I don't really have much testing in here. It's kind of a manual test every time I run this because it's generating the static site. I go and then look at it, see if I'm happy with it. But one cool thing is I do also generate a kind of API as well that the app uses. So for example, we have this categories JSON file. It's just a static JSON file that's generated that just describes all the categories. And this is what drives the sidebar in the actual app itself in here. This is just static content. I've done the same thing for contributors. So if we pick somebody at random, Aaron Adele, this is his static site that was generated using a Go template. I use the GitHub API to grab some information about him, like his bio there, which says not a good developer. And I also generate a little sidecar static JSON file too, so that I can programmatically access this information as well. I do this for the plugins as well. So you can see that everything's like the same, everything's similar. So if there's paths for where the plugins are in the repo, I just keep everything the same. And that pays dividends, cognitive load. So you can see here, there's the bear calls plugin, and it's got all the information in there, including the files, including the content of it. And so this is how the xbar app is able to install applications and things. I also do bring in the images too, because I want the images to be hosted and served statically too from my side. So it's very cool. It's just a simple application. It uses the GitHub API to scrape the xbar plugins repo. So notice this is familiar too. These folders actually decide the folders in the app. And yeah, it walks this repo, it extracts all the information, and it mixes it with these Go templates in order to create the static site, which then gets deployed. So that's really it. And that was a whistle-stop tour of xbar. There's a lot more to it, but generally speaking, that should give you a good overview of the application, how it's structured, and how I put it together. If you've not played with xbar, please give it a go. xbarapp.com to get started. It's open source. It's in beta, but not for long. It's very close. We're very happy with it. And you won't believe some of the plugins that people have written. There's probably already something you need, but if there isn't, it's easy for you to write it too. So please give it a go. Thank you very much.